Now that organizations have settled into this new way of working, the challenge they are facing is keeping their newly remote workforce engaged and excited. Employees' health and well-being have become a top priority during this time and will continue to remain a primary focus for organizations even post-COVID. In the upcoming session, Satyajit Menon, SVP and Head People and Culture Hero Wired, will share his perspective and advice on fostering an employee-first culture, learnings from the pandemic. Also for this session, we have the best question reward. So please keep sharing your questions for our speakers and get a chance to win Amazon vouchers. Over to you, Mr. Menon.
Hi, everybody. We're in the midst of really interesting times as we speak, and there couldn't be a more apt topic to talk about today, which is really being able to foster an employee-first culture, and the many lessons we've learned, right from the time that we went through the entire pandemic experience, and the learnings that have come with it, as we play along. So this isn't necessarily a fix-all, sort of presentation, but it's more in terms of learning what we've all been practicing and working towards as part of the pandemic. Hi, I'm Satya. I'm the lead for people and culture with Hero Wired, and we're going to talk about some really interesting lessons that we've been through over the last year and a half as part of the pandemic. I think it's only apt to start with some really scary numbers that we've seen over the last year and a half, and this is not just very specific to one geography. We're trying to look at how the world has responded to the pandemic, starting with people right at the center of it all, which is the employees that work in these places, right? If I were to look at some of the reactions and steps that companies took as part of the entire COVID experience, what we knew was that a lot of companies, employees, stakeholders, customers, a lot of us were really not prepared to look at the impact that COVID would typically have. And some of the numbers that you're seeing here, for example, net promoter scores or the levels of disengagement, you would find there's a sharp decline in the net promoter score. You'd see that there's a massive increase in disengagement, and I think a lot of that has to do with the employees' overall experience during this really tough period. Needless to say, at a time that we were in, the kind of workplace stress, uncertainty, and all of that just tended to, just escalate to levels that nobody had ever even believed in. And the worst bit was, just being able to adapt to the new normal. To think that 75% of, folks in an organization felt that companies weren't really prepared to deal with the kind of impact that COVID was bringing upon us. And we must also remember that the actors in this entire ecosystem were not just employees or organizations. There were also families involved. With the lockdown scenario, people starting to operate remotely or working from home, generally there was an air of what are we going to be dealing with, in the next coming months or years, right? So from that standpoint, there was one chapter of this entire COVID experience, which was really the kind of experience that people were going through. But then companies were also under immense pressure to scale down on a bunch of costs that probably could have been budgeted, for a year or for a couple of years. And the scaling back on one of the most important parameters was how does this impact recognition and appreciation? And this was just a stat that I kind of pulled out from one of the studies that I had observed. And broadly speaking, you would see that there was a 49 to 50% decrease in engagement. There was a decrease in the likelihood that employees felt that they were supported by their companies. And just imagine a 2x fear of what COVID was going to bring in. There was this fear of how this would impact, their employment or their work or their career. And then on the other side, there were families that people were essentially dealing with. So I think when you look at it from a two-prong approach, companies, and especially people who are working in the HR function, had this huge task cut out for themselves in trying to address, this massive, phenomenon that we were all experiencing. Now, I think when we look at it all, while we may be distracted by the impact that COVID has had and what companies are doing to safeguard their interests and their employees, the one thing that has stood out and the greatest call out has been that how does culture now play a huge role in making sure that you mitigate all these uncertainties, bring a sense of confidence, and people start to feel a lot more comfortable as they, slowly start to either return to work, or a scenario where companies are looking at creating a hybrid environment where people ease into the workplace, over a period of time. But I think it's easier said than done. Up until the period of COVID, the whole perception of remote working or working in a hybrid environment really meant different things to different people. If I were to look at, some of the perceptions that people had as part of driving, a high performance, high engaging culture, pre-pandemic, I think, when you look at how employees looked at flexibility, for example, flexibility really was a function of, an individual's, personal circumstances, really contingent, exigency-based situations where we would make exceptions. And so remote working was possible at that point in time, yet not really something that leaders felt confident in doing wholeheartedly. There is also this perception that, oh, you can only communicate if it's done in person. I don't know of a time when we used a lot of these communication tech platforms to do serious decision-making meetings. I think a lot of them were very personal. They felt that decisions were made better when people met together. Collaboration was better if it was in person. So that was another, aspect of how we saw, culture to be from a person-to-person touch point. The third aspect is around when we look at core values and how companies look at empathy and sympathy, and these are words that you would find in many organizations, and especially traits that you would associate with, if you're dealing with peer-to-peer engagements or even cross-functionally. Generally, getting work done was something that companies felt would be better if done within the office confines. And of course, we talked today about agility and managing performance. I can't imagine a situation where you could have performance discussions remotely. You would want to give feedback, you want to appreciate people, you want to do all those things when you're actually meeting them in person. So I think when you look at these four parameters, and we keep talking about some of the other ones, which is productivity, like unless and until you're not in office, how much work you do and in what time you do all this work, I think it just amplified the myth that remote or hybrid working or just a culture where you could have people choose flexibility. It was all very on-prem. Any physical events, there were very few tech platforms that companies would kind of leverage in. And I think the most important bit was people felt that employees were disrupted by this whole pandemic, by with the lockdown situation and people working from home. I think what very few people realize is the ones that really felt unsettled were the families that were already living their lives, and now you've got all these employees who are now sitting and working out of homes and disrupting the lives of people that were at home. So when you think of working parents, when you look at folks who are elders, you look at that entire social strata, and you feel that so much of our lives had changed at that point in time. So I think at a meta level, these were some of the things that we construed as culture and the ways of working as part of the pre-pandemic era. But when you think of how this whole coronavirus and the lockdown situation and offices getting shut, how that played out into the new way of thinking, so there had to be a reset, and a lot of organizations tried a multitude of things. And I think one of the first things that companies started moving from is one of the core values, which is either being sympathetic or being empathetic. That whole transition to showing compassion, to be participative in that employee's needs, was super critical. The second aspect, really, which is part of what Hero Wired believes at the center of it all, which is, can you create a situation where you're able to develop cross skill, cross pollinate even, to kind of make teams that are interchangeable, that have very little, risks attached to it. For example, if somebody was to fall ill, are there resources that are able to do the same kind of job? And that takes a ton of work, because when you're looking at, you don't have a lot of time, right? In a space of about a quarter, 6 months, you had to really be able to get all these guys productive, up and running, create rosters, look at, swap shifts, all of those things. And I think the whole world today has come to this realization that developing your talent and making them ready for any calamity or disaster that could happen in the future is really, really super critical. Once companies started doing that, I think the broad realization also was that where you work out of is not as important as what you're typically working on. And you could be remote, you could be working out of home, you could have a shared workspace, but really it was about getting the desired results by collaborating physically or by using a lot of virtual means by which we're doing it. The classic example of what we're doing right now is exactly that. And who would have known that you could go through an entire workday by meeting people virtually, making critical decisions, and so on. And so, from that perspective, it's the the technology investments that have been made by organizations today. They are not necessarily just an ally to your day-to-day work. Tech today actually breathes and lives and helps us navigate through a bunch of things, whether it's about critical communication, whether it's about managing performance of people, or even doing pulse checks of how people are doing. A lot of companies that are in the well-being space have benefited immensely because employees were unsure and uncertain of who to reach out to in these difficult times. And a lot of these organizations actually came forward to be that pulse check indicator for a lot of companies in that frame of mind. So, and of course, when you look at how societies and families have come about managing their day-to-day work, I mean, look at whether they're working parents, they're single parents, even gig industry workers. A huge appreciation for what they do really came about because, I can't imagine if you didn't have a gig worker today who helped you with a bunch of things, whether it was about delivering something or whether it was about transacting information. I mean, this was a complete paradigm shift on how you could create a sense of appreciation for people across the board. And so those are some of the critical factors that we would look at it from the new way of working. I also want to pivot to how people perceive culture. Gone were the times when you would look at a traditional thought process where culture is really set by one individual or really about a group of people or a team or an organization. Well, it doesn't happen even in families, actually, quite frankly, because if you look at any family setup, sure, the elders drive the right value systems and beliefs, but what is equally important is how it gets demonstrated. So for example, if being a father, I would want to inculcate the right belief systems to my children, but it's also important for my children to demonstrate the same things when they're talking to people within the family or outside. And I think the same thing goes for organizations too. It is no doubt a two-way street. And by that, I mean that, sure, leaders and important stakeholders really define how culture should be drawn out, how it's got to be spelled out, how it's got to be articulated. But at the end of the day, the behaviors that get demonstrated is really a very critical thing that employees must start, exhibiting, because they're eventually going to be the brand ambassadors of what people perceive that company, to be. So, which is exactly what we're talking of here, which is that you could have leaders define and drive those first principles. I like to call them core virtues rather than values, because virtue is really about putting it into action and not just having them on walls or great posters. It's really about driving it and putting it to action. But I also want to call out that employees really are the flag bearers. They are the ones who trigger those wonderful impressions that others can look at and say, wow, this is a place that I'd like to be part of, feel inspired, and really lead by example. So when when you look at how employees today or talent today, when they look at leaders, they look at it with a very, very different lens. It's not the same what it was 2 years down the line. Sure, there could be a few common links attached to that perception, but if I were to look at some of the really critical aspects of what they think they'd like to see in their leaders and managers, I think there has to be first and foremost a sense of belonging. Uh, Whether you're hiring somebody or whether you're engaging with someone, I think an employee has to feel that they feel part of the whole mission, they feel cared for. And if that doesn't happen, and this is one of any leader's core responsibilities, to create that sense of belonging. The second aspect of it is that most talent today, I would actually go on to say all of them actually, they like to see a mentor or role model in the people that they look up to, not just somebody who's driving results and looking at driving targets and things like that. I think it goes a lot beyond than just results, which again brings me back to the same conversation of is there enough compassion that we show to a bunch of people who are anyway uncertain. And then it's also important for leaders to keep checking, are you feeling good, do you need any help, is everybody okay in the family. Those aspects on care is equally important. um, do leaders feel aligned, or do they value the goals that an employee sets for their careers? Uh, Absolutely should. I think in times like this, when there's so much emphasis put on learning and development and career progression, I think one of the most important questions that any leader should be asking is that what do you want to be, and how can I help you? And so that's another really important aspect of it. And I think the last but not the least is really, gone are the days when you would create a culture of competition, one-upmanship. That's really not cool. You look at leaders today wanting to create a culture of collaboration. The one thing that the pandemic has taught us is really how can we get work done despite all the challenges that we have. And I think the answer to that is, the only way we can drive results, or the only way that we can really define success, is if all of us come together, to align on that one single common mission. So if you were to ask me, I think these are some of the most critical questions, perceptions, and desires of any employee who really is looking, at leaders today in the time. But what I wanted to also do is, I firmly believe that if you call out things that are more than 5 steps, you tend to lose traction. So these are, in my view, the 5 finger snap techniques that one could help to recalibrate culture in the new normal. The first one really being that everybody is so distributed, right? Somebody's working out of the house, somebody's working in a co-working space, some people in office, and there is no better time than now for CEOs, co-founders, founders, and leaders to really be able to clarify purpose, and beat it to death. It's really, really important. The second aspect of it is to really be able to hire coaches and leaders so that they can create a sense of belonging, make sure they're looked at as mentors, and really be able to show that level of compassion, and helping them in that whole process. Appreciation is the third very important step. And you could look at times when we would do this once a quarter, once a year, but this is now going to be a very continuous process, where appreciation is more story based than really citation based. And so peer-to-peer celebrations are going to play a very, very important role, because that really is going to align everyone to an organization's purpose. And the story becomes far more impactful for everyone who's actually contributing to a company. Inclusion is the fourth important aspect. We kind of stop short of doing it at a hiring and all the practices that come with recruiting, but really it's about making sure that it penetrates into every aspect of an employee's event. But you also have to make sure that managers and leaders are trained to create that sort of a culture where they're directly, able to interact through it, through various employee engagement initiatives and day-to-day experiences. And look at employees at an individual level. It's really important that everybody, every stakeholder, leader, starts to talk to people on a one-to-one basis, and then really create an environment where people can feel free to come forward and talk about what they're facing. And the last one really is about time that we all invested in technology, because that is the only way that you're going to improve, whether it's hybrid working, remote working, productivity, or even engagement. Companies who latch on to the tech ecosystem and a culture, those are the ones that are really going to succeed. But I also must add that simply investing in technology isn't going to cut it. You have to have a solid plan on what it's going to achieve. And it's startling, right? Because if you don't have that plan in place, and if you don't have the end game of what it's going to solve for, your adoption rate that employees would kind of latch on to tech drops by 51%, and the overall perception of the employee experience that starts to work on these kind of tech starts decreasing by 32%, which are startling figures, because the whole basis of investing in tech was to increase adoption and was to increase employee experience. So have the end game ready, make sure the plan is in place, and then make that investment so that it solves all the problems that your company is kind of facing. And of course, I want to end it in terms of, I love puns, so I wanted to kind of keep it from a cultural perspective. And it really is about how do you constantly keep evolving your behaviors, virtues, and beliefs in such a way that it's flexible. Something that was relevant yesterday may not be relevant tomorrow, but every organization needs to define these values, virtues, and beliefs on the basis of what's current and what they expect to happen in the future. And on that note, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Menon, for sharing all the important piece of information with us all. Now we'll move further and delve into more exciting conversations. Stay with us.